Good afternoon. Can you hear me well? It works. It seems there is electricity now. And we are quite used actually to live without electricity in Ukraine because 80% of the electric stations were bombed and destroyed by Russian missiles. And I mean, the topic is war, so it's not as appealing as a workshop for children, which I had yesterday. And I was so happy to work with about 150 Indian children, mostly from Kerala. We were creating fairy tales. And this is not a fairy tale, this is a reality, and what I'm going to tell you has to do something with oral history. Of course, in today's age, I mean, any oral history is becoming written history. So in fact, most of what I will tell you happened to me, to us, to my family, to my friends, and it is written. And there is a book, Diary of Invasion, which is already out in English, and a new book, Our Daily War. And in 3 weeks' time, there will be third anniversary of full-scale invasion, but at the same time it will be 11th anniversary of war of Russia against Ukraine, because as you know, everything started in 2014 in February with annexation of Crimea, and in April, May, Russian volunteers with Russian weapons and with Ukrainian separatists started attacking Ukrainian forces in Donbass. But I will not retell you the newspaper news because, I mean, the personal perception is very different. And in fact, on the 1st of January 2014, 1 month before the annexation of Crimea, as we did for many years, we went with my family, with our children, to Crimea for 10 days for winter holiday. And we arrived in Sevastopol, and there were, I mean, it was not annexed, but there were Russian flags everywhere in Crimea, and we haven't seen a single Ukrainian flag. And it's a long story, but it is a sad story, because Kiev had no control over Crimea even before annexation. Crimea was run first by local mafia from 91 till 97, 98, and then it was actually run by the politicians who were controlled by Russia. And Crimea was autonomous republic with its own constitution and its own parliament. And they were ignoring very often the directives or the orders from Kiev, if not always. And what is important to say that in 1991, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, 250,000 Crimean Tatars, the original population of Crimea, were allowed to return to peninsula. And they were promised land to build the houses because their houses were taken over by the Soviet authorities after deportation in 1944 when they were forced out to Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan. They came with their families, they didn't receive any building materials, no land. They started actually taking land illegally and built small houses for their families, and this was the beginning of the troubles. And these troubles for Crimean Tatars are much more serious now because there is new deportation now. Hundreds of them are in prison because they want to be inside Ukrainian state, not again run by Russians. It's a long story, but please take an interest in this because they are the major Muslim community in Ukraine and they suffer a lot. And even today there were new arrests and new ransacking of the houses because they don't accept annexation of Crimea by Russia. But we spent 10 days in January with great pleasure because Crimea is a bit like Kerala, not as beautiful, not as green, but it has mountains, it has actually southern atmosphere, it is the warmest part in the northern Black Sea coast. And it was a favorite place for Russian tsars and aristocrats to build the palaces and to have their holidays there on the land that was taken from other nationalities and minority groups which lived there before. But now back to 2022. The full-scale invasion started on the 24th of February at 5 o'clock in the morning. The evening before, I was cooking dinner for our friends, and it was the biggest number of foreign journalists in Kiev ever since independence. More than 500 arrived to cover the future war. And Ukrainians were still arguing, will there be a war or there will be no war, or is it just blackmail by Putin? And actually, President Zelensky himself was repeating every day, there will be no war. Just prepare for May holidays, for barbecues, enjoy life, everything will be fine. At 5 o'clock in the morning, on 24th, we were woken up by explosions outside the windows. And I jumped to the window, and I looked down, and actually I stood for 40 minutes in front of the empty street. I was paralyzed. I mean, I was expecting something, but I was not expecting that all of the country will be shelled with missiles and explosions will be on the whole territory of Ukraine. And of course, I mean, Ukraine is not of the size of India, but Ukraine is the same size as France. So, I mean, it's 1,500 kilometers from the west to the east, and more than 1,300 from the north to the south. So it's a huge country with no speed trains. So, I mean, most of the trains are overnight trains. And now we don't have aviation for 3 years. So every time I want to go abroad, it takes me 48 hours minimum, because I need to cross Ukraine by train to the border, then to use another train usually to cross into Slovakia or into Poland, Hungary, and from the local airport already I can take a plane first to Vienna and then change, or like this time I got to Krakow in Poland, and I had to stay overnight in the hotel. We had to stay with my wife, and then we took a plane to Sharjah, and from Sharjah here. But India is a long way from Ukraine. When I go to Paris, it takes the same 48 hours usually. So this war actually makes the distance and the time spent illogical. So, I mean, I can go to Oslo or I can go in the same time to Tokyo. But of course, I prefer at the moment to go to shorter distances because you don't want to be far away from home. On the evening of 23rd of February, I cooked borscht. Borscht is a traditional Ukrainian beetroot soup. It's very tasty, it's very thick. You can make it as spicy as good Kerala dish. You can make it spicy and sweet. You can use garlic, you can use chili pepper, etc. And you can use meat, or you can just use beans and vegetables. There are thousands of recipes. I mean, I have my own 13 recipes. So, I mean, this soup is like religion for Ukrainians. And it's funny and sad maybe, in the beginning of the war, apart from the fighting on the front, there was a fight in media whether borscht belongs to Russia or to Ukraine, because Russians wanted also to announce that borscht, it is their dish. So UNESCO acknowledged that borscht is a Ukrainian tradition, and now it is officially registered. So, I mean, the argument between Russia and Ukraine is a very old story. As old as desire of Russia to assimilate Ukrainians and to destroy their language and their cultural identity. Because Ukraine was part of several empires, but for a very short time it was independent. It was strangely independent in 17th century. You've heard about Cossacks. It was a Cossack state, but it was a very unusual state. It was a country with no fixed borders, because all fixed borders were front lines. And Ukrainian Cossacks actually were keeping these front lines, fighting with Polish Empire Kingdom, sometimes against Crimean Tatars, sometimes together with Crimean Tatars against Polish Kingdom, and of course against Russian Kingdom or Moscow Kingdom at that time, because the word Russia appeared much later. So Moscow Kingdom was always trying to expand, and they were expanding to the north, you know, they were taking over slowly Siberia and coming to the Japanese Sea. They were actually expanding in Caucasus, in Kazakhstan, and actually the Soviet Union was the same Russian Empire, but a bit smaller, because Poland and Finland used to be also inside Russian Empire. But again, I mean, I don't want to give you too much information, and I'm coming back to my borscht. Borscht was excellent. I had as guests 3 journalists: Luke Harding from The Guardian, Tim Judah from New York Times. Actually, the 3rd journalist who I invited, he decided to take the last plane out of Kiev. So he took the last Lufthansa plane on 23rd from Kiev to go to Frankfurt and then back home to London. But Brazilian ambassador stayed on, and he came to dinner. And our friend, British journalist and writer Lily Hyde, who writes books about Crimean Tatars, she stayed in Kiev, she's still in Kiev. She came to dinner, and our friend, the director of the Museum of Medical History. So we were sitting, trying to make jokes, eating borscht, drinking good wine, but mostly we were arguing, will there be a war or not? And at some point, somebody said, well, it sounds and it looks all of this like Last Borscht in Kiev. It's a good title. The book is not written yet. But this borscht, Last Borscht in Kiev, was mentioned already in 3 books, because Luke Harding wrote his non-fiction book about experience of the beginning of the war. It's called Invasion. And Tim Judah wrote a book, and in both books they mentioned this dinner and the expectations of the war. And actually Lily Hyde stayed with us overnight. She lives not far away from us. We live in the historical center. Everybody else left home. And at 5 o'clock in the morning, as I said, I was glued to the window, and the street was empty for 40 minutes. And then a lady with 2 small dogs from the house across the road came out and went to walk the dogs in a small square under our windows. And then suddenly life sort of reappeared, and there were first cars, and then 2 or 3 more explosions sounded. But we were not shocked already. The shock disappeared, and we went with my wife and with Lily Hyde to check the nearest bomb shelters. And of course, we glued sticky tape to the windows, because if the broken windows from the shell is the main danger, and because of this flying glass, the first dozens of Ukrainians were killed in the towns and villages during the bombardments and missile explosions. We stayed 1 more night in Kiev. We stayed in the apartment of Lily Hyde because she lived, and she still, I think, rented the same apartment on the 2nd floor, and we live on the top floor of all buildings. So the top floors are considered more dangerous. And recently, actually, the top floor flat of a family of professors from Kiev University was destroyed by shaheds. They were killed just 200 meters from Zelensky's administration on the main government street. So you can imagine that Russian roulette is unpredictable. And it is really Russian roulette. You never know where the next explosion will take place. But every night, people already for several months in big cities don't sleep, because you have 3, 4, 5 air alert sirens, and you check immediately whether we are talking about drones or ballistic missiles or flying missiles, cruise missiles, etc. And even children learned to differentiate and to know what to do in the case of drones or if it is a ballistic missile. I mean, we receive a lot of unnecessary knowledge, but without this knowledge, it's much more difficult to survive in the wartime. So I never thought actually that I will witness the war. I will be in the war zone all my life. I mean, the war started in 2014. I was 53. I'm 63 now, and I'm just trying to remember my child's years, because I mean, I was born 16 years after the Second World War. And I was sure that actually the Second World War was the last one. In the Soviet Union, the war in Afghanistan, where the Soviet army fought, was not considered a war. I mean, it was what now Putin says, special military operation. So the Soviet army was saving somebody in Afghanistan with no positive outcome. So now the Russian army is saving somebody in Ukraine by killing tens of thousands of civilians and, of course, soldiers. And when we spent one more day in Kiev on 24th of February and woke up in the morning of 25th, I checked my phone, my Google map, and I suddenly noticed that it shows that the exit from Kiev to the west is green. The road is not blocked because on the 24th, hundreds of thousands from people from Kiev were escaping from Kiev. And actually, Russian army was approaching Kiev from Belarusian side, from northwest, which is next to us in a way, because I mean Kiev, although it's a big city, but when we leave Kiev center by car, it takes only 15 minutes on the highway to get out of the city. It's 15 kilometers to the west. And I checked and I said, well, let's try to go to our countryside house, because our countryside house in the west from Kiev. Our 3 children and their friends were in Lviv in western Ukraine for long holidays. Lviv is an Austrian-Hungarian beautiful city, actually Ukrainian, which used to be also Polish city. It is multicultural. One of the oldest streets is called Armenian, and there is Armenian church from 15th century. But it is one of the most beautiful cities in Europe. And please come and visit this city after the war. We still have some tourists coming to the western Ukraine, mostly from Poland, because before it became Soviet and Ukrainian, this town for 30 years belonged to Poland. And between First and Second World Wars, the people in this city spoke Polish. From 1945, they spoke and they speak today Ukrainian. But this is the place for the best museums, best restaurants, and the best feeling of changeable history of Europe. Because the city has 5 names. In Russian, Lvov, in Polish, Lvov, in Ukrainian, Lviv, in German, Lemberg, thanks to Habsburg Empire. And a very strange puzzle, the city has a separate name in Italian, Leopoli, but it never belonged to Italy. And Italians never came to do anything there. But, I mean, it is probably a historical secret still to be uncovered and deciphered. But, I mean, Ukraine is full of very interesting puzzles, because lots of small towns' names have Greek names. And the ancient Greek came only to northern part of Black Sea. But you can find villages and towns with Greek names on the border with Poland or on the border with Romania. And now I'm going back to the war. So we managed to find our friend and her autistic son before leaving Kiev by car. So we took them, and 7 kilometers from Kiev we were stuck in the first traffic jam. And we were listening already to the fight, to the Battle of Gostomel, because we were stuck 7 or 8 kilometers away from the place where Russia was attacking Ukrainian forces. And we had military jets flying, Ukrainian jets flying over our cars and shelling Russian positions with small missiles. And at that moment, actually, I received the first phone call from British, I think, newspaper, and then from radio, and I was in the traffic jam commenting what I hear, what I see, and we were listening to the non-stop cannonade of artillery. And this journey, which was less than 400 kilometers from Kiev to Lviv, we didn't make in 22 hours, because the next traffic jams were 50 kilometers long, 60 kilometers long, and after 22 hours at the wheel, I wanted to sleep. So 70 kilometers away from Lviv. We stopped for 2 hours on the edge of the highway, and I slept, and then we made it to Lviv. And we found our children, who were frightened, of course, as everybody else. And the road to Poland was blocked completely, because by that time, hundreds of thousands of cars from all around Ukraine were trying to get to the west. And there is only one main road to the west, and it's not German Autobahn. It's just sometimes 2 lanes in each direction, sometimes 1 lane in each direction. So it's impossible to imagine this number of people, of cars on the road. And when I was in one or another traffic jam, I was checking neighboring cars from which region they were. And I saw that actually all the drivers were asleep. And at some point, actually, there was a driver with a family with kids in the car from Dnipro, which is next to Donbass. It's actually, if you can imagine, Donbass, and then the next region is Zaporizhia and Dnipro. It's 6 kilometers away to the southeast from Kyiv. So I assumed that this man was not asleep for 2 days, for 48 hours or maybe longer. In the end, actually, we decided to go through mountains to the border with Slovak and Hungary. And it was February. In the mountains, it was minus 15. I had half a tank of petrol. And once we got into the mountains, we were stuck into traffic jam, which was probably 70 kilometers long. And then you have to decide what to do, because you have little petrol. All the petrol stations were empty on both sides of the road. So if you want to keep everybody warm, you have to run engine. If you run engine and you keep everybody warm, you will not have enough petrol to get to the border or to the next town. And I went out of the car, and I found a small motel by the road, but all the rooms, of course, were taken. And I explained to the manager that I have I think 8 people in the car, so our 3 children and their friends and us. And he gave me a telephone number of a young man who lived 30 kilometers away from this place, but who recently bought abandoned Soviet hostel for tourists in the mountains. And I called him and I explained that we have a problem, and is it possible to use this hostel? And he explained me how to get there. And I drove to this hostel. This young man came with electrical heaters, with blankets, with brand new towels, and he put us up. And then he went to the traffic jam, and he brought with him back to the hostel about 20 cars with families with children, so that they had a good night. And by the morning when we woke up, the road was clear. So we managed to get to Uzhgorod, and we stayed first with my friend, a local writer, there for a week, and then a lady we never met gave us the key from her apartment. And she went to live with her daughter and daughter's family. And we became officially displaced persons. So, I mean, it's strange to say. I mean, I'm grateful to everybody who was helping us, and there were lots of cases where Ukrainians were helping each other. And that surprised me a lot, because actually Ukrainians, unlike Russians, are individualists. They are not collective. Every Ukrainian has his own image of Ukraine in his head, and the family, the house, the property is more important, first of all, than everything else. And at that time, actually everybody was united, because actually everybody was attacked, and we lived in the town which is called Uzhgorod, a beautiful ex-Hungarian, ex-Transcarpathian, ex-Austro-Hungarian town, which was always empty and sleepy. And suddenly there were 2 times more refugees, IDPs, in the town than locals. And so actually the town became a buzzing spot. A bit later there was a theater coming, actually, actors who were refugees, IDPs, from Kherson and then from Mariupol came and set up theater in Uzhgorod. So like in the time of the war, geography changes. demography changes, everything changes. And suddenly Western Ukraine, which was always underpopulated, became overpopulated. And the houses and the flats in Western Ukraine became more expensive than in the big cities like Odessa or in Kiev. And lots of people actually bought houses there in the villages or in the towns. And it will be very different after the war, because small companies, small business people, they moved their companies also to Western Ukraine. So the agricultural region became half industrial region. And now we have even Japanese factories working in Western Ukraine, producing spare parts for Japanese cars for German market. But this belongs to economy, not to today's history. And as we came by car, and we were living 5 kilometers from the border with Slovakia, I started being invited to give talks about what is happening in Ukraine. I was writing all the time the articles, and I was crossing the border by car, living car at the airport of small town Koshice, and flying to the places I was invited, and then flying back and driving back. So what was incredible for me, and probably the biggest impact on my psyche of this war, is that I became a nomad. I lost feeling of material value of anything. And it was strange, because from a childhood I was a collector. You know, if you were as a child a collector, you were collecting coins, stamps, badges, etc. You are very attached to objects, to something. And suddenly, I mean, I had total indifference, not only to collections or my books or my manuscripts, but I understood that actually, although we have a house, we have flat, but I felt that everything doesn't belong to me anymore. It belongs to war. So the war will decide if there will be ruins on the place of our house, or it will stay intact, or it will be damaged as many other houses, but it doesn't belong to me anymore. And actually, I think this feeling was like psychological compensation. It was helping me to travel, because I lost this feeling of home. It came back partially when I started coming back to Kiev already. We moved to Kiev actually in the autumn 2022, but to say the truth, our youngest son, who was 18 at that time, when we got to Uzhhorod, he said, I will not stay here. I will go to Kiev, back home, and you can not forbid me, because I'm 18 now. And we had to accept it. And we took him to the railway station, and he was the only passenger on the train with 16 carriages going back to Kiev. Kiev was, I mean, the hundreds of thousands of Kiev were attacking the trains going out of Kiev. So people even with tickets could not board the trains. And he was on the way back. And he managed to enjoy the time in empty city, run by military checkpoints. And actually, there was a checkpoint every kilometer. And before the war, even before the COVID, he bought a very old Soviet car, Moskvich, made in 1974, which didn't function. And he decided to use the empty roads to learn how to drive. And I mean, my wife and my children are British citizens. So, I mean, he has British passport, and he had American driver's license, because he got driver's license in California when I was teaching there. And you can imagine, actually, this old, strange car driving towards military checkpoint. He is stopped by the military with machine guns. He stops the car. They look at his documents. They don't know what to do with him. British national with American driver's license in a Soviet car, registered not in his name but in his brother's name, and brother is with us in Uzhhorod. And then actually they said, okay, you can carry on. And he cannot start the engine, because actually this engine once stops, it doesn't start. You have to push the car. So he asks the military to push the car until he can start the engine. So they pushed the car, he started the engine, he drove to the next checkpoint, and there another military patrol stopped him. And the same story, they checked the documents, they look at the car, and they said, well, are you crazy? Okay, go ahead. And he says, can you push my car? So 2 days later, nobody was stopping him in Kiev. So, I mean, when these military people at checkpoint saw the car, they were just showing the drive on, drive on, drive on. At some point, he found out that online shop that sells beer reopened. But we live on the top of the hill in the sort of center of ancient Kiev, and this online beer shop opened in Jewish district Podil by the river, down at the bottom of the town. And you had to, of course, there was no delivery. He had to go to take this beer. So he ordered a case of beer, and he went by car to pick this beer. And then the car refused to go up the road home. So he decided to go more slopey road around the center, and by accident he ended up in front of the government district with checkpoints much more serious than the ones actually he used to pass. And there he had trouble. Actually, he was frightened because, of course, his car was checked, the beer was checked, documents, and he was threatened with arrest. And in the end, they let him go, but he brought beer home, and they hid the car in the garage for 2 or 3 weeks because he didn't want to risk anymore. At the same time, of course, I mean, Kiev's life was very nervous because there were rumors of Russians infiltrating Kiev, and there were rumors of actually Chechen fighters coming to kill Zelensky, and there were from time to time shootings in the center and next to the government district. So you didn't know what was happening because there was no true information. And anyway, that's his experience from the age of 18, and it will stay with him. And I think he learned also a lot of things which are not necessary but can be useful if we are entering the time of unsure, unstable situation in the world. Because, I mean, what we have now, we have two machos. One wants to make America great again, another wants to make Russia great again. It's clear that they will not find common language. There will be only one left before none. And we don't know actually how and who will win. I hope that the American crazy guy will win over Russian crazy guy, because this is in Ukrainian interest. Because otherwise, I mean, Putin announced what he wants. He doesn't want Ukraine to exist. He wants to take it back into Russian Empire. He said that actually Ukraine was invented by Lenin. But I mean, Putin's version of history should be of interest to psychiatric doctors. Because Putin loves the Tsar Peter the Great. I was very puzzled by this kind of affection for Peter the Great, because Peter the Great was pro-European Tsar. He went to Amsterdam to learn how to build ships. He invited German doctors to work in St. Petersburg hospitals, etc. But then actually I realized why Putin likes Peter the Great. Because Peter the Great was the Russian Tsar who defeated Ukrainian army of Hetman Mazepa in 1709. And you know, this piece of history is called Battle of Poltava. So in the times of Battle of Poltava, Ukraine existed. Ukraine existed in 1612 and 1654. In 1654, actually, Ukrainian head of state Bogdan Khmelnytsky was stupid enough to ask Russian Tsar for help in the war against Poland. This was the beginning, or the beginning of the end of Ukrainian independence, because Russia helped, and then Russia agreed that in exchange for help, Russia will guarantee the safety of Ukrainian territories, but Russian Tsar will decide lots of things. But I mean, Ukrainian independence in a shortened, limited version existed until 1780. In 1770, 1780, Catherine the Great banned Cossacks' army. And after that, actually, the Cossacks were told that if they want to keep weapons and to remain soldiers, they should resettle to northern Caucasus and become the border guards with Caucasian people, or they should become peasants and stay in Ukraine. And this was already real end of independence. But in 17th century, Ukraine had legal system. Ukraine had diplomatic relations with Ottoman Empire. And there is a correspondence in the Istanbul archives between Ukrainian hetmans, hetman was headman, the head of the state, and Ottomans of Turkish Empire. Ukraine was always agriculturally very rich land. This is also one of the reasons for this war, because 13% of wheat in the world is produced in Ukraine and exported to Northern Africa, to Egypt, to Canada, and to other countries. And from 2022, at least 30% of Ukrainian wheat is stolen by Russia and sold by Russia from Ukrainian occupied ports, Mariupol and some other ports in Azov Sea, to Northern Africa and to other countries. As you maybe heard, that Trump said that he will ready to help Ukraine in exchange for rare metals that one can find in Ukrainian soil. So he was talking about titanium and many other very rare metals which are used in electronics. And you can find, in Europe, you can find them only in Ukraine. And there are, of course, there is Ukrainian gas and Ukrainian oil and lots of natural resources which were making always Ukraine popular in a negative sense. This was actually the dream of Hitler, to take over Ukraine and to feed Germany. And it was done during the occupation. And this is also one of the reasons of Putin in this game. But what is important to understand, that this is the last war of Putin. That's why it will go on until he is alive. He started it to be included in the school books on history. He wanted to remain in the history as the most important Russian Tsar who made Russia great again, who recreated Russian Empire, who took over what used to belong to Russian Empire. And he failed. I don't think he will manage to, he will manage to kill more Ukrainians and destroy more cities and towns and probably produce more missiles and shell Ukrainian territory. But as we know from this morning, Western information, that yesterday Russia was trying to launch against Ukraine this huge ballistic missile, Oreshnik, which can carry nuclear explosions. And it exploded in the place where it was launched. So it didn't start, which is showing that the sanctions are working, and the Russian high-tech is not really functioning without Indian, without Taiwanese, Chinese, American, and European spare parts. But we don't know what will happen in the next future. Everybody hopes that at least there will be a ceasefire, because everybody is tired. Ukrainian army is tired. 800, 900,000 Ukrainian men are now in the army. And there was no rotation. There were detachments which were on the front line for 1 year, for 1 year and a half, with almost no rest. And we have a lot of issues with the army. And why is this war going on so slowly, and why Russia is still advancing in the east of the country. Because every arms delivery, every ammunition that was promised to Ukraine by our Western partners is delayed between 3 and 9 months. And this is, I think, because the politicians in the West, they understand that if they deliver everything quickly, Ukraine will ask for more. And NATO apparently doesn't have enough ammunition. Now America doesn't have enough ammunition. And the countries which had little, they gave everything to Ukraine. Lithuania, Denmark, Estonia. So actually, I mean, they are now without practical weapon and ammunition because they understand that if Ukraine loses the war, they will be the next targets. Another target in the future will be Lithuania and Poland, because Russian politicians announced that they want a bridge, land bridge between Kaliningrad region, which is part of Prussia, Germany, Königsberg. They want to unite it with mainland Russia. And there is a village Suwalki, and the idea of cutting a corridor, taking land from Lithuania and from Poland, but cutting it and annexing it and announcing it Russian territory will unite Kaliningrad with northern Russia and Belarus. And Belarus is practically now part of Russia because, I mean, Lukashenko is a puppet president and everything is decided by Putin in Belarus. And I think after Lukashenko is retired, Belarus will be announced officially a part of Russian Federation. But this is my opinion. I cannot guarantee. But this Suwalki corridor topic, it was talked in the Cold War times. The Soviet Union was actually saying, but the Soviet Union did not need it because Poland was a socialist country and Lithuania was part of the Soviet Union. But the term already existed, Suwalki corridor. And now the Russian politicians are saying that this is our aim, that we will make it. Do you want it or not? But we will make it like we have now land corridor to Crimea. Because south of Ukraine, except for 2 regions, Mykolaiv and Odessa, is occupied already by Russia, and Russia will not give it up. And probably what will happen in the nearest months, there will be some kind of temporary agreement between Russia, Ukraine, with America actually putting pressure on both, on Russia and Ukraine, just to stop fighting. But of course, Ukraine will not accept politically annexation or occupation of Ukrainian territories. So this war or state of war will remain. Like probably you know that there is until today state of war between Russia and Japan over Kuril Islands. So officially they are still at war. You know the Cyprus situation, which is from 1974 until today. The island is divided. The political, sort of geopolitical state of status of Turkish part is not accepted, not legal. So only Turkey acknowledges part of Cyprus as part of Turkey. The rest of the world doesn't. And because of this, people who live there have a very difficult time. There are no investments, no buildings, no industry, and very little tourism. Until recently, there was no tourism at all, but Turkey was trying to push it, and actually you can visit northern Cyprus, and it's a beautiful place. And you don't need visa, because it is run by Turkey, and it's very cheap, because it is not acknowledged by the world. So actually it's just an attempt of Turkey to subsidize and to make money for this part of an island. And the same is happening with Crimea. There is no tourism in Crimea except Russian tourism, and Russia has to subsidize Crimea, although Crimea was very popular peninsula for the millions of tourists who were coming there every summer. But I'll just check time, and I think we have 10 minutes for your questions and for my answers. So please.
I know a bit about the Ukrainian history. And in 17th century, Poland was very powerful. Part of Ukraine was under them. It was Khmelnytsky, the Cossack hero. How do you pronounce Khmelnytsky or Khmelnytsky?
Sorry?
The Cossack hero Khmelnytsky.
Khmelnytsky, yes, Bogdan Khmelnytsky.
Yes, Bogdan Khmelnytsky. It's he who united the Cossacks of Don and the Zaporožnian Cossacks under him, and was warring the Polish king. And then Khmelnytsky made a mistake, as you said, invited the Tsar to help him out. But Khmelnytsky wanted the Russians to return, but a section of his commanders said, no, we should not antagonize the Tsar. So we should stay with them because we both are Greek Orthodox Church, so to fight the Polish Catholics and all that. That's how this is the origin of the present. And Putin, I believe, had made a serious mistake. He thinks, I remember when the Russian army entered, Putin ordered all the Ukrainian soldiers raise their hands, surrender, but he underestimated the fighting spirit of the Ukrainians or the Cossacks. Now he's paying a price. I believe Ukraine will ultimately win.
You are right, and what is important to understand that when I mentioned that Ukrainians are individualists from 16th, 17th century, because they were choosing their leaders. Hetman was not a Tsar, was not a king. He was elected at the meeting of the senior Cossacks. And the Ukrainian Cossacks, they were choosing the leader, and then they were trying to topple him if they were not happy with him. So there were always internal frictions and problems in the Cossack society. But for Ukrainians, freedom was always more important than stability. And for Russians, because of the monarchic tradition, stability was more important than freedom. So, I mean, Putin is re-elected already for 23 years because Russians think that if you have the same Tsar, it means stable situation. There will be no elections, no problems, no political quarrels, and Putin managed to destroy physically any opposition. So he will stay in power until his death. But then there will be 3 or 4 groups which will kill each other to put next Putin. And he will be also accepted by the Russian society, and they will also vote for him without actually thinking whether he is preparing this future or this future for Russian Federation.
Thank you for the session, sir. This question is with regard to something which might not be of a serious kind, but still being curious. Since all the neighboring countries of Ukraine, especially the Baltic republics, which we don't address as the Baltic republics anymore, and Russia itself and Greece as well, follow the Eastern Orthodox Church's rite in their worship patterns. There's a lot of commonality when it comes to the liturgy and the beliefs of the church in common. How does religion play a role when it comes to this war of culture and language?
Well, Ukraine had, in the last 30 years, 3 Orthodox churches. For first 20 years, the main Orthodox church in Ukraine was a Ukrainian Orthodox Church of Moscow. So actually the priests were telling the believers for whom to vote. And this was a political organization. From 2017, the second Orthodox Church, Ukrainian Orthodox Church of Constantinople, became officially legalized by the World Orthodox Church. So, I mean, it's independent from Moscow. And this is now the main church. It's becoming bigger and bigger. And the priests and some confessions from the Moscow church are changing to be under the Constantinople Orthodox Church, which is really Ukrainian. And there is also Kiev Patriarchate Church. It's a smaller church, and it was a split in the church organization in 1991. It's a small community, but it is also Orthodox Church. And there is even smaller Orthodox Church of old believers in Ukraine, but they are independent, but they belong also to All World Church of Old Believers. It's in 17th century, Russian Orthodox Church was reformed, and the people who didn't want to be reformed, they stayed separately in this church, and this church still exists. We also have two Catholic churches in Ukraine. They are small, but politically very active. It's Greek Catholic Church and Roman Catholic Church. The difference is that the priests in the Greek Catholic Church can marry. And it means that this church is more popular in Ukraine than the Roman. Because in Roman Catholic Church, the priests cannot marry and the rules are more strict. But in fact, actually, Greek Catholic Church was invented by Vatican, especially for Ukrainian territory, in order to give more freedom, but to invite more believers. Because the Ukrainians, they were always freedom-loving, and they didn't like the strict rules of Roman Catholic Church. Well, thank you very much for your attention and for your questions.
Thank you so much for being part of MBIFL.